All indicators right now for Republicans are we're going to have a very bad November. Our Hail Mary pass was socialism, and that's only going to impact some swing voters unless one of these candidates say something just completely crazy that can change this dynamic.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is the battlefield.
Republicans really need to pay attention to this one because there were primaries in Minnesota and Wisconsin. The biggest issue for voters in those two states was ability. Yes, there's some anti-Trump sentiment baked into that, but people showed up in these two states because prices are too high, things are too expensive. Democrat turnout was very high. This is a warning sign for Republicans, and we need to be paying attention because voter enthusiasm is high and they're all pissed off about the economy.
Obviously, Democrats got the more moderate nominee for governor in Wisconsin over the DSA member, Francesca Hong. That would seem to be a sigh of relief for Democrats. On the other hand, in the Senate primary in Minnesota, you've got the slightly more progressive lieutenant governor who's got the whole state Medicaid scandal hanging a little bit more over her. So what was your overall takeaway from these primary results from a Republican perspective?
What was interesting is the polls were so wrong on what was going to happen. And that's because they're oversampling people that are much more natural to Hong and much more natural to the socialists. So when I look at these numbers, I actually had a little bit of alarm on what's happening from a Republican perspective. In Minnesota, Michelle Tafoya is a standout candidate. She's going to be able to raise a ton of money, but celebrity candidates in recent years haven't done very well. I think Michelle Tafoya is going to be a strong candidate, but I'm not sure she's going to be able to pull it off in Minnesota. If you just look at the numbers, almost 700,000 people voted for Democrats compared to the 400,000 Republicans. Democrats are enthusiastic, and it's not necessarily getting picked up in the polls in the right way. And I think that spells trouble for Republicans.
I'm picking up that vibe on the Democratic side, that this whole brewing civil war between progressives and moderates, both sides are willing to do the détente thing for the next 82 days. El Sayed got immediately embraced by national Democratic leadership.
Senate Republicans' top super PAC is pouring in an extra $6 million into Michigan to attack the Democrat Senate nominee. It really shows a commitment to what we're going to do in Michigan. They are throwing some more money in Alaska and Iowa too, but I still continue to think the Republicans' bright light of this cycle is going to be Michigan. I do think Republicans are going to be able to win this because I think Al Sayed has some problems. It is going to be a close race, but if I'm predicting right now, I'm going to say Republicans pick up Michigan, but that will be our only win of the cycle.
Wow, this is right in line with what you said last week on this show, that you anticipated that Michigan was now the opening with Al Sayed as the nominee for the Democrats. I will note that this week, Mary Peltola jumped out to her first polling average lead in Alaska. So I think if Senate Republican PACs are playing in Alaska, they're actually playing for real right now, based on at least the public polls. And in Iowa, look, if I had told you a year ago that your side was going to have to be spending money to protect Iowa, you would have not felt good. So welcome sign from Democrats' perspective.
Donald Trump this week pivoted the nation's attention back to vaccines with an executive order that takes aim to scale back childhood immunization schedule and space out shots into separate visits. And the reason this is in the battlefield is that strategists and even Trump's own pollster, Tony Fabrizio, have warned that efforts to shave down vaccine recommendations may not matter much to most voters this fall. I've worked with Tony Fabrizio. If Tony is telling the president and everybody else that this isn't going to matter, this isn't going to matter. You got people like Frank Luntz, who says nothing in America matters more than affordability. And anytime the administration Republicans go off affordability, they're not talking about what Americans really care about. And Whit Ayers has said Trump's announcement does not strike me as the most persuasive political messaging. Trump is talking about things voters don't care about, and we're starting to see those numbers matter in the states we talked about earlier, like Michigan and Wisconsin.
Whit Ayers is someone that I respect a great deal. He's, in my mind, the best Republican pollster working today. He's a former guest on my podcast. When he says maybe this isn't in our best strategic interest, The translation is, you're out of your freaking mind. What are you doing? We are only a few weeks past stories about the White House trying to rein in our Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his folks over at DHS from their jihad against vaccines, especially childhood vaccines. But now there's this switch around this executive order.
It is a complete mess right now. This is not what we need to be talking about. Yes, Maha likes this. They love this. And this is a nod to that group who Trump feels got him elected. I suspect when you start to look at the scorecard, Democrats are probably still maintaining a pretty solid ground.
Trump's approval numbers, his approval numbers with independents, both of them absolute toilet territory, as you've alluded to on this show several times. The big one to notice here is the generic ballot. I talked last week about the fact that Real Clear polling had put Democrats into this plus 7.2 territory. This is a more reactive polling average. It tends to bounce around a little bit more because of their methodology. But Nate Silver over at Silver Bulletin is a lot more cautious. And now his generic ballot margin is creeping into the exact same territory. So that is a major positive for Democrats coming out of this week.
Now, last week you talked about likely voters, and Nate Silver brought that up this week. What are you seeing with likely voters? How's that starting to impact? How's that impacting the scorecard right now?
What Nate Silver did this past week, and we can get more into this in a moment, is he put out his model, his prediction model. Obviously, he's one of the most well-known and closely watched forecasters, election forecasters working today. He was sort of the OG of the field using this kind of data-intensive approach. He reached the same conclusion that I was speaking to a couple of weeks ago, which is that pollsters tend to make that switch from registered voters over to likely voters somewhere around nowish. And so what you can anticipate in the next few weeks is that more polls are going to switch over to that likely voter model. And what we've seen in other polls is that likely voters are trending toward Democrats. And that's a switch from 2 years ago in 2024. Nate Silver got there a slightly different way. He got to the same conclusion by saying, look at the turnout. It's what you were alluding to in Michigan and Wisconsin earlier. The turnout has been just gangbusters for Democrats, something like a 5.6% turnout advantage across all the special elections, 117 of them that have occurred since the presidential last year. So he gets to the same conclusion by a different route. But either way, what we can expect is those generic ballot numbers, all of the polling numbers, to start to look a couple of points better for Democrats over the next couple of weeks.
All right, so you've gone through all this stuff. What's your bottom line this week?
I don't love handing week after week toward the Democrats. Still, it's hard to take a week where you see this drift toward Democrats in a major measure of the generic ballot and not give it to the Democrats. And of course, the other thing that you can point to is that this is the first week that we've seen Democrats pull ahead on Polymarket as being more likely to take over the U.S. Senate. They've been trailing Republicans on that measure in a prediction market. Now, look, prediction markets, there are issues, there are structural issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
That said, it is another tiny brick in the wall that says things are just continuing to trend toward the Democrats. So my verdict was a slight lean toward the Democrats for this week. You?
I think all indicators right now for Republicans are we're going to have a very bad November. Something dramatically has to change for that, which is why I think your scorecard keeps showing every week trending towards Democrats. Yes, I think we're going to win Michigan. I think it puts the Senate much more challenging for Democrats still to be able to gain control, but I think they will, because I do think Alaska, I think North Carolina, I think Iowa, these are all states that are in play that should not be. Texas keeps going back and forth. I saw a poll where Paxton's finally ahead, but it's only a point or two. So I still think we probably win Texas, but I think we're going to spend a lot of money for it. I am not feeling good about Republicans' chances, because even when you look at these House races, we're now having to defend some scandal-ridden members of Congress who refuse to resign, like Max Miller. All the indicators are bad for us, and our Hail Mary pass was socialism, and that's only going to impact some swing voters unless one of these candidates say something just completely crazy that can change this dynamic. Otherwise, Republicans have a problem, and we got to fix it. We still have time, but we're just not doing it.
And that's why each weekly verdict has been leaning toward the Democrats or fully toward the Democrats, because we keep getting in new numbers, or it's just another week of lost opportunities. But look, if people don't like the structural indicators, if they don't think that prediction markets are really much of an analytical tool, you can always point to real economic numbers. And we just saw this week the economy shed 23,000 jobs in July. There was a downward revision to May and June. Unemployment, the rate actually fell, but that's because so many people are discouraged and have stopped even trying to look for work. And most important is that wage growth has slowed. And so to me, that's the biggest indication of them all, that this cake of economic perception is baked at this point, is just about baked, ready to take out of the oven. That is the biggest impediment to Republicans doing anything at all this fall.